Welcome to the Everyday Dan podcast, where we embark on a bite-sized journey of curiosity and discovery into the myriad of fascinating topics that I am passionate about. I'm your host, Dan, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on this adventure as we learn new things together. Well, guys, it has been quite a long time since I last posted. Life can get crazy, my friends, so between a very busy summer and now I'm actually in the early stages of writing a book. More on that in the future, if it actually goes somewhere. But anyways, it's been a while, but I'm back. Hopefully, in the near future, also going to have a guest host with a very good friend of mine. We're just trying to coordinate our schedules as well. But today, we're going to talk about a topic that personally affects me deeply. Also affects my family, especially my daughter. And it's something that a lot of people don't often understand, and that is ADHD. My daughter has it too, and honestly, I've spent a long time trying to understand how it affects our lives. Now, one of the big things too, we're going to get the elephant out of the room. A common misconception about ADHD is that it goes away as you get older. I've had many people say, oh yeah, I used to have that when I was a kid. That's not true. If you had ADHD as a child, you still have it as an adult. You can learn to manage it better, though. Now, for me, there's a lot of really helpful benefits to ADHD. I dive majorly deep into topics. When I get interested in something, I am all in, which is quite fun and also somewhat obsessive. A lot of times it just gets tossed then in my brain and it ends up being recalled in later conversations, which is cool. A lot of times, though, people say, oh, ADHD means you can't pay attention. Now, there is a Dr. Hinshaw, who actually refers to ADHD as VAST, which basically stands for Variable Attention Stimulus Trait. Basically, he believes the term ADHD, which stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, is inaccurate, and it gives the wrong impression of the condition. And the reason being is that ADHD, that term, implies a deficit of attention. But the thing is, those of us with ADHD have a lot of attention. We have an abundance of attention. The challenge is not that we lack it, it's controlling where it goes. The VAST acronym also highlights the core elements of the condition, which is variability in our attention, the meandering nature of our attention, and our search for high stimulation. Also, VAST tends to frame it as a trait and not purely a disorder, which is good. That distinction is important to Dr. Hinshaw as he's acknowledging the potential advantages of the condition. And the thing is, too, he's not alone in that belief that the term ADHD is unfavorable. There's another doctor, Dr. Holloway, also finds the term inaccurate and demeaning. And basically, that doctor compares using the term ADHD to referring to someone as boring, stupid, and ugly. And then there's another doctor, Dr. Kurtz, prefers the name attention modulation disorder. So honestly, there's different ways that you could refer to it. So there you go. And sources will go that, there's the name ADHD, again, is widely used. A lot of people find it misrepresentative. So just so you know that. It's a good thing to know, be aware of, kind of thing. Oop, where's my notes? There we go. And the thing is, too, also, the big thing, too, is regulating dopamine. We can't really control it like turning a knob. A lot of times people with ADHD, we tend to do what's called chasing the dopamine. We get, again, deeply involved in topics that interest us, gives us that dopamine hit. It's why video games are really addictive for people with ADHD, because it gives us a really awesome feedback loop, constantly bringing it zip, zip, zip. I do something in the level, I win, I get a new item, it's better, I do it again. Now, a lot of times, too, ADHD is, and this is a term I think is really good for any diagnosis, ADHD is a reason, but it is not an excuse for me. I really work hard to try and manage it, to not let it control my life. That doesn't mean I'm perfect at, but one of the things is, I'm super forgetful. I carry a pocket notebook. I have a to-do list app and a calendar. I have a day planner I just purchased as well to help me with that I've already made a ton of use of. and hoping to stick with that. And again, too, it's not, like I said, it's a reason, not an excuse. If I'm citing ADHD as I did this because I have ADHD, that's stupid. So you have to think about that. And there's a lot of different things. I want to highlight a couple different things as we're going through. Also, I want to mention 2 sources that I read through that were really good, and a third bonus source. The first one is called ADHD is Awesome, a guide to mostly thriving with ADHD, and that's by Penn and Kim Holderness of the Holderness family. Penn has major ADHD, worse than mine even. God bless his wife. Another one is How to ADHD, an Insider's Guide to Working with Your Brain, Not Against It, by Jessica McCabe. That may be familiar, but because there's also a YouTube channel of that same name as well, which I've been following as well. And they're really beneficial of that. So I just want to highlight a couple interesting things about ADHD. First, I'm going to hit the drawbacks, because to be honest, there are drawbacks. A lot of times, and again, too, a lot of these notes are pulled from these books, so you're aware of that. Sometimes untreated ADHD can be associated with negative life outcomes, such as lower life expectancy. Statistically, people with ADHD are more likely to experience a variety of challenges in their lifetime. Things like job loss, car accidents, substance abuse, lower income, debt, anxiety, and depression, things like that. Now, just because there's a higher statistic doesn't mean it's a foregone conclusion. It's going to happen. I don't believe that whatsoever. And then there's problems with emotional dysregulation. People that, sometimes, emotions for us as ADHD may be really intense. It's going to be more intense. It can last longer, and it changes more quickly. So sometimes it's harder to respond to situations. A lot of times, too, things kind of get frozen in time. A big analogy would, years ago, and I mean, we're talking like many, many years ago. It was like 2009-ish, I think it was. My grandmother passed away. And it was hard. It was a hard experience. And I grieved her loss. And then I went back to college, and I kind of put that box aside without realizing. And then we'd sing a particular song, and it would just like that, re-kick the grieving process. It would be like, and now there's a difference between kind of waves of grief. Imagine that someone just puts a pause on the grief you have at its most intense point, and then you get distracted, but then it comes back and it's just as intense as it was. It's different than the grieving in waves kind of thing. So anytime I hear certain things or a trigger, it would be like I'm right back in the actual moment. It's not in an aftermath type thing. It's in the moment kind of thing, which is really terrifying. When it comes to grieving, it makes it very difficult with that. So that's one of those things. So that emotionally, a lot of times, it's harder for us to manage emotions. But again, it can be learned. You can learn to work with those ones. Another thing is time management. Sometimes a lot of times, I think there's like 98% of people with ADHD report difficulty with time management. That's because people with ADHD, a lot of times we have shorter time horizons. We're trying to estimate. We have a hard time estimating time. I have a really hard time estimating time frames. I just, not so good. I try to avoid it as best I can, but I still, a lot of times we're more motivated towards immediate reward than a future consequence. So you have to think through those things. There's social difficulties. Sometimes it's really hard to accurately read and respond to social cues, things like that. Sometimes it's harder to maintain intention, hyperactive impulsivity, things like that. Then there's also twos, like as we mentioned, what we call it's an executive function impairment. So sometimes it's hard to regulate our attention, plan, organize, manage time, start and finish this task, remember information. Now again, too, we live in a time point where there's a lot of tools to really help with avoiding that, which is awesome. I'm very glad for that. So those are some of the drawbacks, but then there are some superpowers that ADHD people have. People with ADHD sometimes, actually a lot of times, they're considered incredibly creative, constantly coming up with new ideas. Dave Pikey, the author of children's book series Captain Underpants, credits his ADHD as his success as an author and illustrator. People with ADHD often think outside the box. They're not afraid to be different. they're going to come up with unique solutions to problems. And so they kind of go through different things. An example brought up in one of the books was someone might remember their mother likes bird watching while simultaneously noticing the unique design of their coffee cup, causing them to sign up for a pottery class instead. Just weird things, how we do that. A lot of times people with ADHD are more natural innovators. They're going to be thinking differently than your typical person. But then also, too, hyperfocus. Now, this is something you don't realize, but people with ADHD can hyperfocus on something. If someone is interested, they can become completely absorbed in it. There are many topics in my life that I am just like, I was wickedly absorbed into, and so I have all this information. Penn Holderness, one of the co-authors of ADHD is Awesome, he describes that hyperfocus allowed them to win the amazing race. A lot of times people with ADHD can be very adaptable. They can think on their feet. Sometimes you're going to have to improvise. A lot of times they're very curious, high energy, and sometimes they're really, I'm saying sometimes because that's always going to happen. They'll focus on the big picture as well as joy in the moment. It's easy for ADHD people to kind of look at the moment and be like, hey, this is awesome. This is a really cool thing. So we have to think about those things. So there's a lot of different points and benefits, and there's a ton more information about ADHD. I'm not going to continue dragging on about this, but one of those things too is, and I'm going to cover this last thing about how ADHD affects personal relationships, because maybe you are friends with someone who has ADHD. Maybe this will help you be a better friend to them, or just maybe understand why they're weird, because to be honest, a lot of us are weird. Sometimes we really struggle with inconsistent behavior, capable with one thing one day, we're struggling the next. And that's the fluctuating nature of the ADHD symptoms. Sometimes you have a bad brain day, but things like sleep, stress levels, environmental distractions, a lot of things like that are going to really throw things off if you're not sure what's going on. A lot of that times that emotional dysregulation can really go through and make it hard to empathize, things like that. It can hinder effective communication, relationships, difficulty in listening. That's why I write things down a lot of times. If someone says something, I write it down so I can try and come back to it. As well as, again, people tend to have a stigma when you mention you have ADHD because people will judge and criticize. I really don't always like to mention that I have it because I've had enough times where people have either said to me, oh yeah, I had that when I was a kid, but I grew out of it, or, oh, okay, whatever, and kind of moved out. So I tend to not mention it because of that fact, the stigma. But then there's great things. People with ADHD, again, we can be very spontaneous, enthusiastic, and just kind of out there with our perspectives. And that can be really great with relationships and friendships, things like that. There is also a really capacity for deep empathy, which is really good when it comes to supporting each other. So there's a lot of great things with that. And now, first off, I'm also glad that you stuck with it and you're back here. I know some of you recently have been asking, like, when is the Everyday Dan podcast coming back? Well, I'm back. And those of you that recently subscribed to my YouTube channel, you are awesome. And I appreciate all of you guys and sticking with me, and more to come because we got some more fun stuff in the pipeline. So looking forward to that. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.